Welcome to a journey across time, love, and survival. This is the Time Capsule Bride, a heartfelt science fiction story set on the red sands of Mars, where solitude meets destiny. In a future where Earth is no longer what it once was, and the past lingers in fragments of memory, one man lives alone, until a girl from the year 2044 arrives in a stasis capsule. What begins as a mystery slowly unfolds into a story of human connection, genetic secrets, and a bond that defies the boundaries of time and space. So take a deep breath, let the silence of Mars surround you, and step into a tale where love is not written in the stars, but grown in dust. The wind on Mars didn't howl, it whispered, a low, constant murmur of red dust sliding across the hull of the Ares 3 outpost, like time itself brushing past forgotten things. Inside, Jor and Weller moved through the metal corridors with a rhythm born from years of repetition. Check oxygen levels. Recalibrate the moisture harvesters. Patch the thermal seals. Again and again. He'd been alone for too long to keep count. The outpost creaked with age, despite his constant upkeep. Every bolt, every hatch was known to him, like bones of an old friend that wouldn't stop groaning. The artificial day cycle washed the narrow hallway in soft amber, casting shadows that sometimes moved when they shouldn't have. He used to think he was imagining it. Lately, he wasn't so sure. He paused in the airlock, helmet in hand. His eyes flicked over a thin stream of data trailing across the console, an anomaly in the electromagnetic field. It wasn't big, barely a blip, but out here, blips mattered. He hesitated. Then he suited up. The rover trembled as it crossed the brittle ground, climbing ridgelines of rust and basalt. Joran kept his eyes on the navigation screen, though the path was etched in his memory. Solemn Vyes, a scar on the planet's surface, so old it made even Martian dust feel young. It was one of the few places he hadn't fully mapped. Something about its jagged silhouette had always felt watchful. The signal grew stronger as he approached the canyon rim. He parked, stepped out, and let the dead silence of the planet settle around him. No wind, no birds, just the weight of emptiness stretching for miles. His boots crunched on stone as he descended into the ravine. Every few steps, he stopped to scan the ground. The data pulse was coming from beneath the surface, but there were no signs of wreckage, no lost probes, nothing from old Terra missions. Then he saw it, half buried in the dust and rock, a shimmer of something unnatural. Smooth, symmetrical, man-made. His breath caught. He dropped to his knees, brushing away the Martian grit with gloved fingers. The curved glass of a stasis window glinted beneath layers of red sediment, and behind it, barely visible through the frost, was a face. A young woman, frozen in time. He stared, heart thudding. The capsule bore the markings of a forgotten initiative, Project New Dawn. He hadn't heard that name in years. It was one of the last desperate attempts to preserve humanity before Terra fell. Most were rumors, failed launches, doomed hibernation trials. But this capsule, it was real and intact. Joran touched the side of the glass, eyes locked on the still form inside. She looked peaceful, almost as if she were dreaming. He should have called it in, logged it, followed protocol. Instead, he whispered to the silence, "You shouldn't be here." But even as he said it, he knew his world had just changed. And somewhere, under the Martian wind and buried years, something had started to wake up. The moment felt too delicate to breathe. Joran stood motionless, one hand pressed against the frostbitten capsule window. The face behind the glass didn't move, yet something about it seemed aware. Not quite awake, but not entirely gone either. She looked serene, her brow smooth, lips slightly parted, dark hair fanned out behind her in frozen curls, like a memory suspended in amber. He ran a gloved finger across the emblem etched into the capsule's edge. Project New Dawn, 2044. The date alone made his chest tighten. This pod was nearly 3 centuries old. He circled it slowly, brushing away more layers of Martian silt. The structure was mostly intact, shock-absorbing alloys, bio-insulated core, power cells still pulsing a faint, stubborn rhythm. Whoever built this had expected it to last. And somehow it had. A diagnostic screen on the side flickered when he touched it, surprising him. The interface language was a mixture of old Earth code and encrypted biometric commands. It wasn't something he recognized, but the pod did recognize him. Compatible user detected. Manual override enabled. He exhaled, the inside of his helmet fogging slightly. Manual override. He had a choice. Bringing the pod back to Ares 3 would drain reserves, oxygen, power, even space. But leaving it here, in this crater of forgotten desperation? No, he couldn't. Not after seeing her. He activated the rover's lift assist and began securing the capsule. It took over an hour to extract the thing. The Martian soil clung to its sides like it didn't want to let go. Back at the outpost, the docking chamber hissed as pressurization equalized. Joran wheeled the capsule into the med bay, dim lights casting a sterile glow over the frost-covered glass. He connected the unit to the ArcPod terminal, an old data port he'd modified for decoding relic tech. As he ran preliminary scans, his mind raced. What if she was the only one left? What if this pod was more than just a person? It was history itself, preserved in a heartbeat. The monitor beeped. Life signs, stable. Brain activity, dormant but responsive. Cryogenic integrity, 97.6%. He leaned forward, staring at her again. Lyra Monroe, he read softly from the log file. Biological scientist. Age at entry, 27. Reason for suspension, classified. He didn't like that last word. Outside, the Martian night settled in, windless and cold. But in the outpost's heart, something ancient was beginning to stir. And for the first time in years, Joran Weller wasn't alone. The first breath came as a whisper, a sharp intake that fogged the glass from the inside. Joran jumped, eyes wide as the vitals monitor lit up in rapid succession. Brain activity, active. Core temperature, rising. Neural stabilization, in progress. She was waking up. The stasis capsule released a long, hissing sigh as its internal systems decompressed. Microvalves opened with precision, releasing decades of frozen silence into the sterile room. Joran stepped back, hands tense at his sides. The frost inside the glass began to melt, revealing her face more clearly. Soft features now flushed with warmth, her eyelashes fluttering like a dream, trying to resist the morning. Then, slowly, her eyes opened. Blue. Not cold. Not glassy. But alive. She gasped again, this time with panic, her body jolting against the harness. Her breathing accelerated, muscles straining as if trying to escape some invisible trap. Hey, Joran said quickly, stepping closer. You're safe. You're not under anymore. Her eyes snapped to him. Confused. Wild. But not vacant. Where? Where am I? Her voice was hoarse, as if pulled through centuries of dust. You're on Mars, he replied, softer now. Ares 3 outpost. You've been in stasis. For a long time. She blinked slowly, the words soaking in. Her gaze moved past him to the room. Bare walls, medical scanners, pale lights humming overhead. She touched her chest, fingers trembling as she felt the absence of familiar weight. No ID badge. No Earth gravity. I was at the launch site, she whispered. Tara, I remember injections. A countdown. Then nothing. You've been asleep for almost 260 years, Joran said gently. The girl closed her eyes. Her lips pressed together as if trying to seal something in, a thought too big, too loud. He waited. The silence stretched until finally she exhaled. Project New Dawn, she murmured. It worked. I guess it did, Joran replied, unsure what else to say. She looked back at him, studying his face with a strange intensity. And you? Are you part of the project? No, he said quickly. Just someone who found you. She sat up slowly, unfastening the safety harness with shaking fingers. My name's Lyra Monroe. I'm a bioresearcher. We were told we'd be helping humanity restart, preserving knowledge, skills, genetics. Everything. Joran nodded, but said nothing. And Tara? She asked, voice barely audible. He hesitated. It's still there, he said at last. But it's changed. We'll talk about that later. She didn't push him. Not yet. Her gaze drifted toward the viewport. Beyond it, the red sands stretched like an alien ocean under a dying sky. Then she whispered, so this is what the future looks like. Joran stood beside her, watching her take it in. For the first time in decades, the outpost felt less empty, less haunted, and somewhere deep inside, he knew, this was the beginning of something that couldn't be reversed. That night, the outpost hummed with quiet life. Joran watched from the doorway as Lyra sat at the galley table, clutching a steaming cup of nutrient tea between both hands. She hadn't said much since the first wave of shock wore off. Her eyes drifted from the cup to the control panel, then to the small viewport where Mars loomed like a sleeping beast. She was calm on the outside, but he could see it, the thousand questions churning just beneath her skin. Still doesn't feel real, she said finally. Her voice was steadier now. It's like waking up in someone else's dream. He gave a slow nod. Takes time to adjust. She looked at him. What happened to Tara? Jordan hesitated. His hand twitched near the edge of the console. The words sat there in his throat, waiting for the right moment. The truth would crush her. That the planet she remembered no longer bloomed with cities or forests. That project, New Dawn, wasn't just a hopeful initiative. It was a desperate evacuation plan. That Terra had collapsed under the weight of war, climate failure, and something darker, something Helix never publicly admitted. He opened his mouth. It's still out there, he said. Changed, damaged, but not gone. Lyra searched his face, as if trying to read the fractures in his voice. But she didn't push. Not yet. Instead, she nodded, setting the cup down carefully. Do you live here alone? Yeah, he said. Maintenance duty. Automation systems need a human failsafe. I got the assignment years ago, just never left. Why not? He looked away. Guess I got used to the quiet. She smiled faintly, but her eyes didn't match it. Later, after she'd gone to rest, Joran sat alone in the comms room. He stared at the blinking terminal, where encrypted history files about Terra's fall still sat untouched in a restricted archive. He thought about deleting them, but he couldn't. Instead, he accessed Lyra's memory shard, not to invade her privacy, but to check for biosign stability. That's what he told himself. The data began to unspool, slowly at first, then faster. Layers upon layers of genetic keys, archival memory structures, and fragments of encrypted warnings. One stood out locked deep in the neural root. Do not initiate wake sequence if Helix Council is still operational. Joran frowned. Helix Council. He hadn't heard that name in years. But if Lyra's pod had carried a failsafe warning, that meant the project hadn't just been preservation. It had been protection. And now, she was awake. The outpost slept in shadows, except for one glow, faint, flickering, from the med bay. Joran sat alone, eyes fixed on the data stream running across the ArcPod terminal. The memory shard had revealed far more than he expected. Not just genetic archives or mission logs, but something encrypted, almost organic in its layering. The deeper he went, the more the system resisted, as if it was hiding. He bypassed the standard interface and activated a low-level diagnostic tool, something old, Terran-built, patched together over the years. The moment it connected to the shard's core, the screen flashed red. Unauthorized access detected. Initiating echo lock. He froze. A pulse of static burst through the speakers. No words, just a sharp, oscillating hum that made the air feel heavier. The outpost lights dimmed for a second, systems recalibrating. Joran leaned back, chest tight. Then something whispered, not through the speakers. In his head, a voice. Soft. Female. They're still watching. He yanked the interface cable free. The hum stopped. The silence returned. But not the calm. Across the room, Lyra stirred in her sleep, her vitals momentarily spiking on the monitor, then leveling out again. He looked at her, uneasy. Whatever was buried in that shard, it wasn't just data. It was live, reactive, and maybe even aware. Joran tapped into the external logs. There had been a faint energy spike outside the outpost during the interface. Just a flicker, but it aligned perfectly with the incoming signal path from Solemn Valles. Something had pinged back, or answered. He rubbed his face with a tired hand, pacing the room. The warning in the shard wasn't a metaphor. Helix Council, whatever was left of it, had embedded live protocols into the capsule. Fail-safes, triggers, and he had just tripped one. For the first time since he'd arrived on Mars, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like someone was listening. Lyra hadn't spoken much that morning. She wandered the narrow halls of Ares 3 outpost with quiet, deliberate steps, like someone walking through a museum dedicated to a future she never signed up for. The floor panels clicked faintly beneath her bare feet. Everything felt too clean, too sterile, like the world had been wiped and rewritten in shades of gray and hums of machinery. Gone were the soft fabrics of Earth's homes, the breeze through cracked windows, the distant sounds of cars or birds or laughter. Here, there was only air pumped by silent fans and recycled 50 times a day. She paused in front of a wall unit labeled Hydro Ration Dispenser and pressed her palm to the panel. A thin stream of water trickled out into a glass made from biocomposite. She sipped it. Metallic. Lifeless. Joran stood nearby, leaning against the doorway, watching her with a calm kind of patience. He didn't interrupt. He just let her look. What do you think? He asked finally. Lyra turned the glass in her hand. I think this place feels like it was never meant for people. He gave a small, dry chuckle. That's fair. She moved on, passing by the nutrition module. Dehydrated meal packets lined the shelves. Plain white wrappers stamped with blocky codes. One read, Cal 900 protein mix, neutral flavor. A mistaste, she muttered. You'll get used to it. I hope not. Joran cracked a small smile, but didn't argue. They reached the dome hatch, one of the few places in the outpost where natural light filtered in. The red landscape stretched far and flat, as if Mars had been exhaled into existence and never took a second breath. Lyra stepped closer to the glass. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and unfamiliar under the Martian sky. When I was in school, she said softly, they used to show us pictures of Mars. And they always added a sunrise, like it made the place seem more reachable. Joran said nothing. I didn't realize how much I took for granted, she added. The smell of wet concrete, coffee shops, tree pollen, rain. He glanced at her. You're not the first person to miss rain. She turned to him, suddenly needing something to hold on to. Do you ever forget what Earth looked like? I try not to, he said. But sometimes it blurs. The memory gets quiet. Lyra looked away, her jaw tightening. I don't want to forget. You won't. She didn't answer, but her hand brushed against the glass, fingers trembling slightly. They stood in silence for a while, surrounded by the distant hum of generators and the weight of a planet that had never known oceans. Mars didn't offer comfort. It offered survival. But even in survival, Lyra thought there had to be room for something more. And maybe, just maybe, that's why she'd been brought here. The storm hit just after lights out. Outside, a Martian windstorm battered the shielding plates of the outpost. The atmosphere didn't have enough density for howling, but the vibrations were enough to make the walls hum like the inside of a drum. The emergency systems had already kicked in, sealing outer doors and cutting external feeds. Inside Ares 3, the lighting dimmed to a soft amber, like the world itself had been told to hush. Lyra sat on the floor of the main operations room, cross-legged, a tangle of wires and tools beside her. She had asked to learn how the oxygen recycler worked, said she wanted to be useful. Joran didn't argue. He liked her curiosity. It made the place feel alive in a way it hadn't in years. He stood a few feet away, recalibrating the solar intake regulator, when a soft tune drifted into the room. At first, he thought it was part of a system notification. Then he saw her holding a small, ancient audio cube in her palm. The edges were scratched, the holographic label barely readable. What's that? He asked. Something I brought with me, she said. Didn't think it would still work. The melody was gentle, old earth jazz, slowed and crackling slightly, like it had traveled across time just to arrive here. The kind of music you heard in candlelit cafes, in lives that no longer existed. Lyra stood, brushing off her knees, and looked at him with a crooked smile. Care to dance, Mars man? He blinked. What? You saved my life. Least you can do is entertain me for 2 minutes. I don't dance. You do now. She walked over and took his hand before he could protest again. Her touch was warm, deliberate. The low gravity made everything feel slightly slow, slightly surreal. Movements were light, floating. Every shift of weight sent them drifting in subtle arcs across the floor. It wasn't graceful, not even close. They stumbled once, then twice. Joran muttered a half-swear when he bumped into the chair. Lyra laughed, really laughed for the first time since she woke up. Something cracked open in him at that sound. They kept going, awkward and clumsy, and suspended in something that wasn't quite silence anymore. Her eyes found his, steady and unafraid. See, she whispered. You're doing fine. He didn't answer. He just held on. The song faded, replaced by the low static of nothing. But they stayed there a moment longer, unmoving, like two people afraid the gravity would remember it was supposed to pull them apart. And in that fragile stillness, Joran realized something strange. He didn't feel like a ghost anymore. The outpost returned to its usual rhythm after the storm passed, but something in the air had shifted. Lyra moved with more purpose now. She helped with daily maintenance checks, cataloged inventory, even asked Joran to teach her how to operate the internal systems. He agreed, though he kept a watchful eye on her, especially when she got too close to the older tech connected to the ARPod terminal. That morning, she stood in front of the console, scanning old navigation files when the screen flickered. Did I do that? She asked, glancing at him over her shoulder. Joran looked up from the utility rack. Do what? The screen, it just blinked. He walked over, brow furrowed. The Arc Pod hadn't reacted to anything in years unless manually prompted. Now, as he approached, the screen glitched again, then stabilized. A symbol appeared in the top left corner, a rotating spiral in deep blue. His stomach turned. That wasn't standard Terran code. "Step back," he said gently. Lyra obeyed without question, but her eyes stayed locked on the screen. The terminal buzzed, and lines of data began to stream across it, faster than Joran could follow. Biometrics, genomic markers, neural tags. The system was scanning the room. No, scanning her. Then the words appeared. User identified. Alpha 47. Genetic match confirmed. Access granted. Decoding memory shard. Joran's hand hovered over the kill switch, but he didn't press it. He was too stunned. Lyra blinked slowly. What does that mean? He didn't answer. Not yet. On the screen, a new interface emerged. Sleek. Minimal. The edges of the display curved in soft pulses of light. A design language unlike anything he'd ever seen. Embedded within the code was a signature he'd hoped never to encounter again. Helix systems active. Tier 3 override initiated. He stepped back, heart pounding. I didn't do anything, Lyra said, breath short. I just touched the panel. Joran shook his head, voice low. You didn't have to. It already knew you. The air in the outpost suddenly felt colder. Something had awakened, and it wasn't finished with her yet. The room dimmed as the interface transitioned. Lights along the Arc Pod terminal flickered into a soft blue hue, and then the voice came, calm, precise, and unmistakably human. Directive unsealed. Subject, Alpha 47. Begin playback. Joran didn't move. Lyra stood beside him, frozen. A video faded in. The image was grainy, slightly warped from decades of data degradation. But the figure was clear, a woman in a lab coat bearing the Project New Dawn insignia. Behind her, rows of stasis capsules lined a dim corridor. Joran recognized the place. He'd seen in archived research logs. It was the original Helix facility on Terra. The woman looked into the camera, her expression weary but resolute. If you're seeing this, then Alpha 47 has survived stasis and reached a responsive state. You've made it further than any of the other prototypes. Lyra's breath hitched. This message is encoded directly to your neural imprint. That means no one else can hear it. Only you. But Lyra wasn't hearing it in her mind. She was hearing it aloud, just like Joran. You are the last viable vessel for the Helix Genome Reseed Protocol. Your DNA carries the complete command structure needed to initiate repopulation systems. Terraformers. AI habitat cores. Seed vault unlocks. Everything. Joran stared at her like he was seeing a different person. If Helix Council is still operational, you must not activate. Do not trust anyone connected to central relay nodes. They will not protect you. They will control you. The screen glitched. For a moment, the woman's face warped, eyes too wide, jaw twitching. We try to warn them. They turned the mission into a weapon. Then it cut to black. Silence returned, heavy and full of questions. Lyra stood perfectly still. What did she mean by vessel? Joran didn't answer right away. He was still processing the words, the implications. If what they just heard was real, Lyra wasn't just a scientist. She was the key to an entire infrastructure, biological access to systems far beyond either of their reach. He finally spoke, voice low. They didn't just send you forward to preserve humanity. They built you to restart it. Lyra took a step back, shaking her head. No, that's not who I am. I don't think it's a matter of who you are, Joran said gently. It's what they made you. She turned away, arms crossed tightly over her chest, staring into the darkened corner of the med bay. Nothing felt real anymore. And yet, something deep inside her had stirred, something that felt like memory, but older than anything she'd ever lived. Lyra didn't speak for a long time. She sat alone near the viewport in the habitat dome, knees pulled to her chest, her gaze locked on the lifeless Martian plain beyond. The red sand stretched endlessly, broken only by the distant shimmer of old solar panels. It should have looked peaceful, but to her, it felt like exile. Joran approached quietly, a steaming mug in his hands. He didn't offer platitudes or apologies. He just placed the drink beside her and sat a few feet away, giving her space to decide if silence was enough. I don't feel real anymore, she said at last. Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't even shaken. Just hollow. I used to think I was chosen because I was capable, she continued. That I earned my place in Project New Dawn. But now, I'm a key, a tool, a biological failsafe. Joran looked at her, then down at his hands. You're not a tool. You heard what she said. I'm a vessel. A walking passcode for the future. I'm not even sure which thoughts are mine anymore. He let her words hang in the air. Lyra turned her head, eyes rimmed with something heavier than tears. Did you know? I knew you were important, Joran admitted. I didn't know how much. Not until the shard unlocked. Then why didn't you tell me when it started responding to me? Because I saw what it was doing to you already, he said quietly. And I thought, maybe if I gave you time, you could find yourself before the world tried to use you again. She blinked, caught off guard. And have I? She asked. Joran didn't flinch. You're not what they made. You're what you decide to be. Lyra exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders softening, just barely. Outside, the Martian wind shifted direction, sending new ripples through the sand. She watched it for a long moment, then reached for the cup beside her and took a sip. It tasted flat, but warm. And for now, that was enough. The entrance was buried under 2 meters of Martian dust. Joran had passed the area before, back when he first arrived at Ares 3, but the slope had looked like just another wind-eroded ridge, forgotten and meaningless. Now, with the ArcPod's coordinates unlocked and Lyra's biometrics authorized, it opened like a wound. The door groaned as it slid aside, its magnetic seals grinding against decades of corrosion. Behind it, a stairwell descended into the dark, vanishing beneath rusted lights that pulsed faintly to life as they stepped inside. No welcome messages. No AI greetings. Just cold metal and silence. Lyra followed close behind, wrapped in a thermal layer under her suit. Her boots echoed against the steps, and with each footfall, the air thickened, not just with dust, but with the weight of something unspoken. This place wasn't on any map, she whispered. Joran nodded. That was the point. The stairwell gave way to a narrow corridor flanked by sealed doors, most of them fused shut by time or Martian moisture intrusion. At the far end was a reinforced vault with a familiar logo, Project New Dawn. The emblem was faded, the paint chipped away, but Lyra's eyes locked onto it with a mix of recognition and dread. Joran accessed the console beside the door, inputting the same override used on her capsule. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door hissed open. Inside was quiet devastation. Rows of stasis capsules stood in slanted formation, some still intact, others shattered like broken glass coffins. Wiring hung from the ceiling like dried veins. Frost clung to the walls in patches where the temperature controls had long since failed. A few capsules still pulsed dimly, their biosystems caught in endless loops of error messages. Lyra stepped forward, breath shallow. One capsule displayed her name. Not her specifically, but a version, LY-Ray 14. Another beside it read, LY-Ray 23. Then LY-Ray 35. Dozens of them, each with a designation, each with a number, each one empty or dead. Her knees buckled slightly, but she kept moving. Her fingers touched the glass of a ruined capsule. Inside lay a skeletal form, still curled in fetal position, skin mummified, a face that might once have resembled hers, now eroded by time and failure. Joran stood a few steps behind, silent, watching. What happened to them? She asked, her voice a whisper broken by disbelief. They didn't survive integration, he said. Or they did for a while, until the neural load crushed them. Lyra turned toward him, eyes wide. Integration? He nodded grimly. Project New Dawn wasn't just about freezing people for the future. It was about engineering the ones who'd rebuild it. Memory shards weren't just backups, they were replacements. Her chest rose and fell, each breath heavier than the last. I wasn't the only one. No, Joran said. But you're the only one who made it. Silence returned, deeper now. The kind that filled in behind grief when there were no words left to carry it. Lyra stepped away from the capsule, toward the center of the chamber. She looked around, not just at the dead, but at the intention behind them. This wasn't hope. It was design. Cold, cruel, and calculated. Whatever she thought she was, whatever future she imagined, this place had rewritten it. And yet, in the stillness, she stood. Alive. Lyra sat on the grated floor of the lab, her back against a cracked control panel, arms wrapped tightly around her knees. The air down here was colder, drier, like the whole facility had stopped breathing decades ago and never resumed. She didn't cry. Her eyes were too dry for that. But inside, something had collapsed. Joran crouched nearby, working to stabilize power from a portable cell. He didn't say anything. There wasn't much that could be said in a place like this. Rows of capsules surrounded them. Glass tombs etched with numbers and tags, silent evidence of how far the project had gone to get her. 30, 40 more. They weren't names. They were iterations, versions, experiments. She was Lyra, 47. I'm not even the original, she murmured. Joran turned slightly. What? She didn't look up. I thought I was sent forward to help build something, to preserve knowledge. But I wasn't sent. I was made, and I wasn't even the first try. Joran approached slowly and sat down across from her. You survived. That has to mean something. Does it? She said bitterly. What if I'm just the version that didn't break? He didn't argue. The silence that followed wasn't cruel. It was real. There were no comforting lies to offer here. Then the console beside her flickered to life. Joran raised an eyebrow. I didn't do that. The system displayed a prompt. Biometric sync detected. Initiating deep archive playback. Lyra stood abruptly. Is that? Your neural signature must have triggered something, Joran said. The screen filled with code, dense, layered, and moving fast. But it wasn't just raw data. It was structured like memories. First-person accounts, implants, voice logs, visual overlays, all labeled with one designation. Lyra, 00 to Lyra, 46. Lyra stepped forward, hand trembling slightly as she reached toward the display. A video played. One of the early prototypes, maybe Lyra 09, lying awake in her capsule, twitching, whispering nonsense to herself. Another clip. Lyra, 21, trying to stand, screaming as the integration of a memory shard collapsed her neural pathways. Lyra, 35, lasted longer. She wrote messages on the walls of her pod before losing motor function completely. Lyra covered her mouth. They tried to upload entire personas into us, she whispered. Memories from pre-collapse scientists, engineers, leaders. Joran nodded grimly. They weren't just preserving the species. They were trying to shortcut the rebuilding process by turning you into the ones who already knew how to do it. But they didn't survive because it was too much, she said, voice shaking. Joran looked at her. And somehow, you integrated all of it. She stared at the screen. Dozens of failed versions. Crushed by memory overload. Erased by knowledge they never lived. And yet here she stood, alive, coherent, aware. All of them, she whispered. A collage of lives I never lived. Joran stepped beside her, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. But you're still you. You have their knowledge, but not their control. That's the difference. Her lips parted as she processed that. The final file began to play. A log from the lead scientist of the project. Prototype 47 shows full memory merge success without identity collapse. For the first time, we have a viable candidate. Genetic integrity is stable. Cognitive independence remains intact. Subject unaware of full integration, recommended. Lyra's breath caught. They didn't want me to know. They were afraid if you realized what you were, Joran said. You'd reject it. And they'd been right. She took a slow breath, steadying herself. The fear hadn't left, but clarity had joined it. A sharp, terrifying awareness. She was built to be humanity's reboot key. But the choice to turn that key, that was still hers. They almost missed it. The beacon didn't sound like an alarm. It didn't blare or flash or scream through the halls. It simply hummed, low and steady, a soft vibration pulsing through the floor like a second heartbeat. But to Joran, it was unmistakable. He shot to his feet. That's not background noise. Lyra followed him as he hurried toward a secondary console tucked in a side alcove. Most of the system had been offline when they arrived. Dead terminals, corrupted drives, faded status lights. But now, one corner of the interface pulsed with golden lines, forming a rotating spiral. He didn't need to read the signature to know what it was. Sentinel beacon, status, active. Transmission, engaged. Transmission, Lyra asked, already hearing the panic in her own voice. Joran's fingers flew across the console. It's not just broadcasting internally. It's sending a ping off-world. Long-range relay. To where? He checked the coordinates. His jaw tightened. Outsystem. A relay node positioned along the old Helix satellite network, near the Kara region. Lyra's stomach turned cold. That means someone could hear it. If Helix Council still has surviving AI branches, or even passive listening nodes, they'll get the signal, he said, and they'll know you're awake. She stared at the screen, pulse rising. Can we stop it? Joran shook his head. It's a legacy system. Buried protocols. Soon as it detected a stable sync, your sync, it activated automatically. It's hardwired. You didn't trigger it consciously, Lyra. Just being in this room did it. The spiral on the screen spun faster. Below it, a new status line appeared. Authorization verified. Alpha signal confirmed. Tracking initiated. Joran slammed his fist against the panel, the sound echoing like thunder in the empty lab. They're coming, he said flatly. Lyra backed away from the console. The hum grew louder now, more insistent, like it wasn't just transmitting, but listening. They built this place to wake me and signal them, she muttered. No, Joran said. They built it to test you, and if you pass, to reclaim you. Her eyes burned. Well, they're not getting me back. Joran looked at her, his voice low. Then we need to move. Before they do, she gave a slow, shaking nod. But even as they gathered what they could and prepared to leave, Lyra couldn't shake the sense that the signal had already done its damage. Somewhere, across the stars, an ancient system had blinked awake. An eye that had long been closed was now turning its gaze back toward Mars. And it was looking for her. The door slammed shut behind them with a metallic clang. Joran spun, instantly checking the interface panel. The override was dead. Manual control disabled. Power rerouted. A line of red text scrolled across the top of the screen like a silent verdict. Bio-lockdown initiated. Subject Alpha detected. Protocol wakefire active. Lyra stumbled back, eyes wide. What's happening? The facility thinks you're being extracted, Joran muttered. It's triggering containment. What does that mean? It thinks someone's coming to retrieve you. Helix protocol says keep the asset inside until the carrier arrives. The lights above them dimmed, flickering into a deep amber hue. A sound like a slow intake of breath moved through the vents. A ventilation flush, rerouting air through sterilization cycles. The hum of machinery returned, but not like before. Now it had purpose, rhythm, awareness. A voice crackled overhead. Female, calm, perfectly modulated. Alpha-class specimen detected. External threats possible. Initiating lockdown integrity sweep. Please remain in your designated zone. Nope, Joran snapped, yanking open the service hatch on a nearby control node. We are not staying in any zone. Lyra stood frozen for a moment, heart hammering against her ribs. The walls no longer felt like rusted relics. They felt like skin, like she was inside something that had been asleep and was now slowly remembering how to breathe. Joran's fingers moved fast, bypassing safeties, redirecting minor power flows. Sparks jumped as he overrode one of the failback regulators. Can you shut it down? She asked. Not without triggering the defense systems. And trust me, you don't want to know what those look like. Suddenly, a new screen unfolded from the wall, displaying a top-down blueprint of the entire facility. In the center, a blinking red dot, their location. All exits sealed, except one. A maintenance shaft, Joran said. Narrow, probably collapsed, but it's our only shot. The voice returned, now smoother, more human. Warning, Subject Alpha must not exit containment. Termination protocols will activate if unauthorized extraction occurs. Lyra's stomach dropped. Termination? Joran paused. Bluff. Maybe. You don't sound sure. I'm not. The floor beneath them thudded. Once. Then again. A deep mechanical sound, like something ancient shifting its weight after years of stillness. Go, he shouted, grabbing her arm. They ran, darting down the side corridor past failing lights and cables twitching like veins. Behind them, a security bulkhead slid closed, seconds too late to trap them in. They reached the shaft entrance. Rusted, narrow, barely wide enough for one person. Joran pried the emergency seal loose while Lyra scanned the corridor behind them. I can't believe they'd rather kill me than let me leave, she said. They don't think you're a person, Lyra, he replied through gritted teeth. They think you're a trigger. He kicked the panel loose and motioned her inside. She hesitated. What if the other end's blocked? Then we die trying to be human. Better than surviving as property. She looked at him, eyes fierce with defiance and fear. Then she crawled into the shaft. Joran followed. As the panel sealed behind them, the voice echoed one last time, but quieter now. Almost regretful. Alpha-class signature lost. Lockdown compromised. Alerting recovery unit. Far above, somewhere beyond the red sky, something began to move. The shaft spat them out into a maintenance corridor barely lit by dying emergency strips. Dust choked the air. Pipes hissed from thermal stress. Everything here felt abandoned, unimportant, forgotten by the systems above. But Lyra wasn't thinking about the facility anymore. She was thinking about what the voice had called her. Alpha-class specimen. Subject. Asset. She was done being a designation. As Joran sealed the panel behind them, she walked forward, deeper into the corridor, until she reached a side room labeled Biometric Lab, Archive Unit 3. Its door hung slightly ajar, half dead from neglect. She pushed it open. The room was filled with monitoring pods, half disassembled, rusted panels, broken wires, and, at the center, one last functioning biointerface terminal, a device used for syncing implants, identity matrices, genetic tags. She stared at it, a muscle twitching in her jaw. Joran caught up a moment later. "What is this?" "A mirror," she said quietly. "For the version they think I still am." She walked to the terminal, brushed off the screen, and powered it up. The soft blue interface flickered to life. "Welcome, Alpha 47. Sync status, stable." She clenched her fists. "Stop calling me that." She found the controls and navigated to the core memory configuration. There it was, her embedded signature. Layers of code, labeled by Helix Council. Preloaded mission directives. Identity locks. Repopulation sequences. All tied to a name she hadn't chosen. Lyra Monroe. But more than that, Alpha 47. She looked over her shoulder at Joran. "They built me like a failsafe. Like a switch." "You're more than that," he said. "You've already proven it." Her fingers hovered over the input field. Then, slowly, she began typing. Override requested. Password denied. Override confirmed. Biological impulse authorization. Manual entry permitted. She deleted her designation. Alpha 47 erased. She paused for a moment, then typed. Lyra Monroe, independent access signature, reclaimed. The screen blinked once. Update successful. Subject identity, Lyra Monroe. Directive path, null. The terminal went silent. No alarms. No lockdowns. No denial. Just acknowledgement. She let out a long breath. Her shoulders loosened for the first time in hours. When she turned to Joran, something behind her eyes had changed. Not hardened, not cold, but centered, grounded. "They made me to be a vessel," she said. "But I choose who gets to fill me." Joran smiled faintly. "And who's that?" She tilted her head. "Someone who gets to say no." Outside the chamber, the systems were still scrambling. But in here, for a moment, there was peace. And a woman, not a weapon, standing in her place. The storms had passed. Not just the ones outside, but the ones inside them, too. For the first time in weeks, the silence at Ares 3 outpost felt like peace rather than isolation. Dust still clung to the windows, and the solar collectors needed recalibration. But inside the central dome, something new had begun to grow. Literally. Joran crouched over a shallow hydrobed, carefully planting the first genetically revived seed, a strain of barley last seen on Terra before the oceans died. He pressed it into the nutrient-rich substrate like a fragile promise, then sealed the pod beneath a thin membrane. It pulsed faintly under the grow lights, alive in a place that had forgotten life. Lyra stood nearby, arms folded, watching. She wasn't helping, not yet. She was just taking it in. "You sure this will work?" she asked quietly. Joran glanced up, not sure of anything. "But that's the point, isn't it?" She smiled faintly and stepped forward, her fingers brushing over the transparent surface of the hydrobed. Beneath her touch, the soil sensors responded with a faint blue glow. The new Earth garden wasn't large. Just two domes connected by an old cargo tunnel, converted from storage to cultivation. Joran had built the framework from salvage parts, welded by hand, piece by piece. Lyra had suggested calling it Eden, too, but he shook his head. "No second Edens," he'd said. "Let's just call it what it is, a beginning." Now, rows of green flickered to life, starter moss, oxygen algae, pre-fruit vines. Nothing glamorous, nothing beautiful, but it was alive. Lyra bent down, pressing her palm flat against the damp edge of the growth tray. "When I was little," she said softly, "my dad took me to a community greenhouse in the city. I remember thinking the air tasted different in there, like it had more truth." Joran looked up at her, his hands covered in soil. Maybe it did. For a while, they worked in near silence. The hiss of irrigation valves, the soft hum of recycled air, the faint sound of new roots stretching beneath synthetic ground. Later, as the artificial sun dipped into its evening cycle, they sat beneath a hanging lantern, just two chairs, a thermos of warm protein broth between them. "Feels strange," Lyra murmured. "After everything, to be still." Joran nodded. "Strange, not always bad." She reached down and pulled something from her pocket. A small stone, smooth and black, found near Solemn Valles. She placed it gently at the base of the barley pod. For luck, she said. He didn't question it. Just watched. Above them, condensation formed tiny rivers on the dome's surface, mimicking rain. Mars had no water to give, but they'd taught it how to dream of it. And in that moment, surrounded by silence and chlorophyll and the beginning of something unspoken, Lyra felt it. Not survival. Not purpose. Hope. The first warning came as a soft beep, barely audible, echoing through the comms terminal at the far end of the outpost. At first, Joran thought it was a sensor glitch. Mars had a habit of whispering false alarms through its decaying systems. But the second beep followed, louder. Then the lights on the panel began to blink in a precise, methodical rhythm. Lyra looked up from the garden's diagnostics. That's not a soil alert. Joran was already on his feet, crossing the room in long strides. He tapped the main display, pulling up the transmission stream. His brow furrowed. It's a ping, he said slowly, from the Kara relay station. First signal we've gotten in months. She stepped closer, heart racing. Is it Earth? No. Worse. On screen, the transmission unraveled. A short, encrypted message repeating every 12 seconds. The code was old, obsolete by modern standards, yet still unmistakable in its structure. They didn't need full decryption to read its intent. Helix reclaimers active. Project New Dawn confirmed. Return the asset. Non-compliance will result in sterilization protocol. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. They found me, she whispered. After all this time. Joran didn't answer at first. He stood still, jaw clenched, eyes scanning through the attached metadata. The message was triangulated from one of Helix's old orbital nodes, likely reactivated by the beacon they triggered weeks ago in the lab. It hadn't just sent out a location. It had told the Council exactly who was alive. What does sterilization protocol mean? She asked quietly. He turned to her, voice grim. It means they're sending something here. Not to talk. Outside, Mars remained still, dust floating gently in the gravity-softened air, the garden pulsing with new life behind them. But above that fragile peace, space had begun to shift. Lyra sat down, trying to slow her breathing. They don't want me back. They want to erase me. Joran nodded. To them, you're not Lyra Monroe. You're an asset. A failed experiment that somehow got too far. But I'm not just that, she said, her voice trembling with both fear and defiance. Not anymore. He didn't hesitate. I know. He reached for the terminal again, fingers moving faster now, overriding protocols, scanning space for inbound objects, preparing every contingency he hadn't needed in years. The outpost had never been designed for defense, but he would make it one if he had to. Lyra stood beside him, no longer afraid. Not fully. Something in her had changed, rooted, like the barley sprouting in the garden behind them. They had built something here, something worth protecting, and Helix was coming to take it away. Joran stood in the comms bay, sleeves rolled up, grease streaked along his arms. His hands moved with urgency, deliberate, practiced, like a man who'd prepared for a war he never thought would come. The prototype Echo Drive sat before him, a smooth, disc-shaped module no larger than a dinner plate, humming faintly with newly awakened power. Its polished surface shimmered with embedded neural thread lines, meant to store not just data, but emotion, memory, and voice. This isn't just a message, he muttered, tightening a panel. It's proof we lived. Behind him, Lyra worked to compile their story, compressing years of silence, discovery, pain, and fragile love into data packets. She wore her old field jacket now, patched and dusty, the name tag still stitched above the heart. Monroe L. How much can it hold? She asked. More than you'd think. It's built for redundancy and speed. Audio, video, biometrics, environmental logs. He paused. We'll even copy segments from the Elysium record. The garden sounds. Our voices. Lyra exhaled softly, as if trying to breathe meaning into the air around her. Like a time capsule. But this one might never find a receiver. Doesn't matter, Joran replied. Even if it drifts forever, someone will know we tried. They moved quickly but carefully, downloading files from the ArcPod terminal, including the decrypted Helix logs, genetic blueprints from the failed capsules, and every last audio bite of Lyra's awakening. Her voice, once uncertain and broken, now firm and vibrant, flowed into the Echo Drive. Joran added his own layer, recordings of terraforming experiments, notes on his years in solitude, and the design specs of their garden. It wasn't just science or desperation. It was their legacy. This drive is everything Helix doesn't want known, Lyra said, holding it as if it were a child. Everything they buried with the others. He nodded, which is why we send it away. Outside, dusk painted the Martian sky with deep orange streaks, thin and stretched across the horizon like a slow-burning flame. The launch platform blinked to life, an old scout drone, retrofitted with new thrusters and guidance, prepped to carry the Echo drive into the void. Joran made one final calibration, then stepped back. You should be the one to place it, he said quietly. Lyra walked up the ramp, knelt beside the open compartment. She held the Echo drive to her chest for a moment, then gently set it inside. Her fingertips lingered on the edge. Go, she whispered. Find someone who still believes in hope. She stepped down, and Joran sealed the hatch. With a slow, deliberate rumble, the scout lifted from a pad, kicking up rust-colored dust, its beacon pulsing a soft blue. It rose like a prayer into the thinning sky, then shot forward, slicing through the fading light, heading toward stars that might never answer. They stood together in the quiet afterward, watching until the signal vanished. We sent our story, Joran said. Lyra slipped her hand into his. Then we've already won something. The warning alarms pierced the silence of Ares 3 outpost like knives. Red strobes bathed the command center as the perimeter sensors flared alive. One by one, they marked the approach of something cold, angular, and unfeeling. Joran stared at the readings. Unmanned Helix warcraft. 3 of them. Low orbit. Silent approach. Lyra stood beside him, eyes locked on the monitor. They're not here to negotiate. No, he said grimly. They've come to reclaim what they think is theirs. The scout drone carrying the Echo drive had launched hours ago. If it reached deep space relays, their story might survive. But Helix didn't want stories. They wanted control. Joran raced to the defense panel, flipping open a rusted latch and pulling out the override rods. Ares 3 had never been meant for war. It was a scientific post, not a fortress. But deep beneath the soil, there were emergency measures. He'd installed them himself, long ago, when paranoia was the only company he kept. Help me prime the geothermal lines, he barked. Lyra blinked. You want to blow the garden? It's either that, or they take you. I'll collapse the ridge over the valley. By time, maybe throw them off. And what about you? She asked. He paused, forcing a weak smile. Not part of the plan. Her fists clenched. No, we run together. Hide. They'll find us. You know that. He reached out, gently touching her cheek. I built all this so someone could live free. That someone is you. Lyra stepped back, shaking her head. I won't leave. I won't. A tremor shook the station. Dust trickled from the ceiling as external cameras captured one of the Helix drones descending, wings folded inward like a bird of prey. Listen to me, Joran said, voice urgent now. The escape pod's still intact. It's small, cloaked. Head north to Kara Station. Hide in the comms array. Wait for a rescue, or something better. No, she breathed. You don't get to decide for me. I already did, he whispered, and with a swift motion, injected a sedative patch into her arm. She staggered, reaching for him, tears welling before her knees gave out. He caught her, held her close one last time. I'm sorry, he whispered. You're alive, Lyra. I was just the keeper of the flame. He lifted her into the pod, strapping her in, sealing the hatch. The pod slid down into the underground rail launcher, a relic of earlier missions, jury-rigged now for one final use. Joran climbed back up, facing the skies again. As the Helix drone hovered lower, preparing to deploy whatever cruel technology it carried, Joran activated the geothermal failsafe. A deep rumble began beneath the crust. The valley would soon fold in on itself, crushing the garden, the research post, and anything within reach. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He stood alone on the ridge as the Martian wind tore at his coat. As the earth shook violently and the heavens darkened with machine wings, Joran Weller made his final stand, not with weapons, but with love carved into every bolt of the outpost. The Martian sky, once a dull canvas of rust and silence, now shimmered with a streak of something small and silver. The Echo drive, launched from its hidden rail and piercing the thin atmosphere like a final whisper of defiance. Inside the escape pod, Lyra stirred. The sedative was fading. Her lashes fluttered, and then her eyes opened to the narrow porthole beside her. Mars was receding. The crimson planet, with its scars and secrets, its dust and dead hopes, pulled farther away as the pod accelerated. She pressed a hand against the glass, trembling. Joran, There was no sound but the soft hum of life support and a faint pulse from the echo drive embedded behind her seat, transmitting, endlessly, their truth. A flicker blinked on the console. Playback initiated. Joran's voice filled the pod, steady and warm. If you're hearing this, then the garden bloomed. Even if for just a moment. Images appeared. The new earth garden in golden sunlight. Lyra laughing as soil spilled through her fingers, the first vine curling toward the light. Joran, covered in dust, smiling behind her. We were not designed to survive, but we loved like we would. His voice cracked slightly. Project New Dawn failed. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe it gave me you. Another image. The two of them dancing under starlight. Weightless, awkward, human. Lyra wept silently, her hands still pressed to the porthole as the red marble shrank behind her. She knew what had happened. She didn't need footage of the blast. She could feel it, a tear in the world that had once held her safe. To whoever finds this echo, we were here. We tried. We loved. He paused, and the last sentence was a whisper. Joran Weller. A builder. A fool. A man in love with the last dream. The pod continued drifting, guided by inertial pulses and algorithms long forgotten. Somewhere beyond Kara Station's range, somewhere past the silence of Helix, the signal would carry. Lyra reached into her suit and pulled out the Elysium record, their shared audio journal, incomplete but full of life. She placed it gently beside the echo drive. 2 hearts encoded in bytes. As Mars vanished, a single tear slid down her cheek, weightless in the cabin's artificial gravity. She closed her eyes and whispered, "You didn't let time steal love from us. I'll carry it wherever the stars take me." At the outer rim of Mars' orbit, where rust-colored dust met the silence of stars, Kara Station flickered to life with an anomaly it hadn't registered in over a decade. Inside the comms bay, Annalise, a young systems engineer born long after the collapse, stared at her console in disbelief. The incoming signal wasn't noise. It pulsed with encrypted data and emotion, a dying star's heartbeat wrapped in memory. Her fingers trembled as she patched the channel to audio. Static broke. Then a voice, clear, warm, tired. "This is Joran Weller. If you're hearing this, then perhaps time has forgiven us. We were two against the cold, and somehow we bloomed." Anna's breath caught in her chest. A chill ran through her as more audio spilled from the Echo Drive's package. Lyra Monroe's laughter, bits of a diary, a music clip distorted by interplanetary delay. Then silence. And finally, coordinates. Coordinates on Mars. She glanced around the bay, but there was no one else listening. No mission control. No oversight. Just her, the stars, and this unexpected fragment of humanity. Hours later, Anna stood alone beneath the dome of Kara's upper deck, staring at the red planet below. She had grown up thinking Mars was nothing but war relics and cold outposts. The idea that love had survived out there, had planted something and waited, made her chest ache in ways she didn't fully understand. She activated the uplink. To whoever's left at Ares 3, "We received your message. We heard everything, and we're coming." There was no guarantee anyone would answer. No confirmation that this wasn't a ghost transmission echoing endlessly across the void. But Anna believed in the weight of stories, and this one had found her. As the stars turned and Kara's orbit swung again, the station's engines began recalibration. Old charts lit up with new relevance. And for the first time in years, Mars wasn't just a graveyard. It was a beginning. The wind that brushed over Ares 3 outpost carried something different now. Less the sharp sting of sterile air recyclers and more the breath of a world quietly waking up. New Earth Garden, once a dream built from desperation, had flourished into a sanctuary carved into red rock and memory. Vines laced with bioengineered chlorophyll clung to the outer walls, drawing moisture from the thinnest traces in the Martian breeze. Seedlings from ancient Earth sprouted in nutrient foam beds, reaching toward artificial suns hung like promises overhead. Lyra knelt in the soil of bed 3, her gloved hands stained green from pruning. She whispered names to the plants, old names from old stories, ones her mother used to tell before Terra became dust. "This one's Juniper, and this, I think you'll be Willow." She paused, pressing a hand against her belly. A tiny shift answered beneath her skin. The child had been growing quietly, fed by protein packs and filtered air, but more than that, fed by the stories she'd been recording each day. A new entry of the Elysium record was always the last thing she did before sleep, whispering tales into the garden's audio logs so that the baby might one day know what kind of world love could build, even at the edge of everything. Inside the main habitat dome, old data cores have been repurposed into warming chambers for seedlings and fermentation units. Automation had returned, slowly, thanks to Joran's patchwork of salvage drones and Lyra's adaptive coding. The hum of self-sustaining life systems now blended with the soft gurgle of water reclamation pumps. It no longer felt like a bunker. It felt like home. A small plaque had been mounted near the hatch to the garden. Lyra had etched it by hand, her strokes shaky but sure, in memory of Joran Weller, who taught a broken world how to bloom. She didn't cry anymore when she said his name aloud. The ache was still there, deep and coiled, but softened by time and the rhythm of living. Joran had given her this, space to grieve, but also space to grow. She sat by the hydroponic stream as twilight painted the dome's glass and gold. She pulled out the portable terminal, started a new log. Date 368. Tomatoes are fussy, but we're figuring it out. Your father would have hated how long it takes to fix a broken pH pump. I told you about him again today. How he rigged a light array from an old mining beacon just so I could dance one more time. I think you kicked when I said that. She smiled, watching the water flow, carrying specks of root and dust. In the distance, just beyond the dome's reach, a small probe antenna blinked softly. Kara's reply had come a week ago. The message was short, hopeful, a signal from the stars saying, "We remember you." Lyra placed her hand on her stomach again and leaned back, letting the hum of the garden wrap around her. This was no longer a colony. This was Terra, reborn in dust and defiance. It was quiet in the garden that morning. Lyra moved through the rows with a gentle rhythm, brushing her fingers along the petals of crimson-tinted blooms that should have never survived on Mars. Her breath fogged slightly in the cool dawn, but her steps were calm, deliberate. Today wasn't about maintenance or planting. Today was for memory. She stopped before the tallest tree in the new Earth garden. It was the first one they had planted together. Back then, it had been a fragile sapling wrapped in heat-insulated gel. Now its branches stretched like open arms toward the curved glass ceiling, filtering simulated sunlight into a warm, green haze. In her hands, she held a small capsule. Matte black. No lights. No interface. Just a single glyph etched across the center. ER, Elysium record. Inside were hundreds of entries. Voice logs, data clips, scanned sketches, photos from Terra, her dreams, his voice, the sound of laughter and crying and silence. Every note that made up their life. She knelt, brushing back the topsoil near the tree's roots. "This is where you belong," she whispered. "Not on a server that might fail. Not in some broadcast hoping to be heard. Here where things grow." She lowered the capsule into the earth and covered it gently, pressing her hand into the soil as if sealing it with warmth. Her other hand instinctively rested on her belly, where a new heartbeat stirred, a living continuation of the story she was burying. A hand-carved plaque lay beside her, ready to mark the spot. She had spent hours etching the words, revising each sentence until it felt true. This isn't just a love story. It's a roadmap, one that leads back to the human heart. She placed the plaque at the base of the tree, then stood back and breathed it all in, the mingled scent of plant life and dust, of decay and growth, of endings and beginnings. Later that evening, she recorded one final message into the garden's ambient log. If someone finds this one day, don't think of it as a tomb. It's a seed. Every voice inside this capsule, every scar and smile, was real. We lived. We chose love in a place designed for silence. And that changes everything. Above her, the stars began to pierce through the dome's shielding. And somewhere, far beyond Mars, the Echo Drive still drifted, carrying fragments of the same truth, waiting for someone to listen. The horizon shimmered under Mars's thin morning light, casting long shadows across the garden's red-soiled edge. Lyra paused mid-step, watering vessel still in hand. Her breath caught, not because of the wind or the dust, but because of what she saw moving across the plains. A silhouette, not a dust devil, not a rover, a man, walking slowly, purposefully, toward the outer perimeter of Ares 3. The defense sensors hadn't sounded. No warnings, no alerts. Joran had designed them to recognize only one type of approach as non-hostile. Helix encryption that had been manually overridden. But that made no sense. She stepped outside the garden's protective canopy, heart pounding in her chest. The figure drew closer, dust clinging to his tattered uniform. His gait was uneven. One arm hung stiffly by his side, as if it no longer worked right. When he finally came into full view, Lyra noticed the faded emblem on his chest, a broken helix symbol slashed clean through with a crude red line. A defection mark. A helix operator who had disavowed everything the council once stood for. He stopped a few meters away and raised both hands, palms outward in peace. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. His voice was dry and raw, like someone who hadn't spoken in weeks. "I'm here because I used to be part of it, of all of it, and I'm sorry." Lyra's fingers hovered near the old emergency beacon. She didn't press it. Not yet. The man slowly knelt, pressing one hand against the Martian soil. "We called you M47, he continued. "The only one who didn't lose herself. The one who chose not to break." Lyra flinched. That name, she hadn't heard it spoken aloud since the day she destroyed the biolock in the lab. "I read your signal," he said, eyes lifting to meet hers. "The echo drive. Your message. The garden. Him." He motioned toward the rows of green behind her. "I didn't believe it at first. Thought it was bait. But then I listened again and again. And I knew. No system, no program could fake that kind of love." Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. "Why are you really here?" He looked down at the soil once more. "Because I helped build the place where you almost died. I ran simulations. I coded the parameters. I gave the order to terminate the others. But no one told me what it would feel like to see one survive, to hear her sing to a child, to build a garden in the dust." He reached into his coat slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a small box. Inside was a data shard. "This is everything I have on Project New Dawn, on Helix, on the real reason they made you. Names, coordinates, weaknesses. If they ever come back, you'll need to know." He stood, letting the box fall gently into the dust between them. "I don't want forgiveness," he said. "I just didn't want to die still part of the lie." Without another word, he turned and began walking away, limping back toward the horizon as silently as he had come. Lyra bent down and picked up the box, holding it against her chest. And for the first time in a long while, she whispered a prayer, not for herself, but for the man who had once helped build a prison and had come to leave behind a key. The garden shimmered under Mars's late afternoon light, every leaf catching the sun like pieces of memory preserved in glass. Rows of green stretched out from the center of Ares 3, no longer contained, but expanding naturally, like breath returning to a world long thought dead. Lyra stood near the heart of it, beneath the canopy of the first tree she and Joran had planted together. Its roots had taken to the Martian soil with a stubbornness she admired, weaving themselves around ancient rock, thriving on recycled water and light forged from fusion. At its base lay a small stone slab, hand-carved, imperfect, but full of meaning. She knelt beside it, brushing Martian dust from the engraved words. "To Joran Weller, keeper of the flame, you did not let the silence win." Next to the stone, small flowers had bloomed, genetically resurrected flora from Terra's distant past. Wild violets. Joran had once said they reminded him of the skies before the collapse. Soft, impossible, but worth believing in. Behind her, a child laughed. She turned, watching the little boy run through rows of greenery, hands outstretched as if to catch sunlight itself. His dark hair caught the wind. His name was Eli Monroe Weller. He didn't know yet the full story of the world before him. But one day he would. Lyra sat beneath the tree, her fingers wrapped around a data shard. The Elysium record, a living journal of their time, of fear and survival, of music and sacrifice, of love that had grown like roots in dust. With steady hands, she placed it into a sealed compartment in the earth, right beneath the slab. It clicked softly shut, not buried, not hidden, preserved. "Who's that?" Eli asked, running back and pointing at the stone. Lyra smiled, brushing hair from his forehead. "That," she said, "is your father. He stayed behind so we could grow." Eli tilted his head. "He planted the garden?" She nodded. "He started it with hope. We keep it alive with love." A breeze swept through the garden, rustling leaves like pages turning in a book long unfinished. Far above, the sky shifted from rose gold to dusk, and for a moment, the stars peeked through early. One of them, just one, flared brighter. A flare from the outer systems. Perhaps a ship. Perhaps more. But for now, the garden stood still. No longer just a symbol of rebellion or survival, but of continuity, of humanity reshaped by loss, made beautiful by choice. On the stone slab, dust began to settle again, but the words remained untouched. Joran's flame had not gone out. It had taken root, and it would bloom long after the last broadcast ended. Thank you for listening to the Time Capsule Bride. In a world shaped by dust and silence, love still found its voice. Through memory, sacrifice, and the stubborn hope of two souls, the impossible became real, and the red planet bloomed. If this story touched you, helped you sleep, or made you feel something true, please consider sharing it with someone who needs it. More stories are on their way. Until then, stay curious, stay kind, and never stop listening.